Good morning, everybody. I'm Margaret Lowe-Smith. I'm president of Atlantic Live. Thank you for being here at our second morning briefing of this convention. We're meeting here every day at Atlantic Convention headquarters, and we're going to spend this morning surveying the numbers, the polls, what they're saying. And there will likely be a lot of relevant numbers for you to tweet. So for that, we're on Twitter at hashtag the Atlantic RNC. Feel free to tweet the conversation. Before we kick things off, I do want to thank our underwriters making this week in Cleveland possible. They are the American Petroleum Institute's voteforenergy.org, Pasira, and Maker's Mark. Maker's Mark will grace us with bourbon ballot Manhattans and delegate delights at our cocktail caucus this afternoon. No drinks this morning. And we've got a great lineup to help us sort through the data. Kristen Soltis Anderson is co-founder of the research and analytics firm Echelon Insights and a Washington Examiner columnist. She's done extensive research on millennial voters and is the author of The Stealthy Vote, Where Millennials Are Leading America, and How Republicans Can Keep Up. Hi. Chris Wilson is CEO of the polling firm Wilson, Perkins, Allen's Research and did polling for Ted Cruz during his presidential run. And Kellyanne Conway is a Republican strategist and pollster. She's president and CEO of the polling company and is advising the Trump campaign. Welcome all. Here to lead the conversation is my colleague, Atlantic editor Ron Brownstein, who I think it's fair to say is a fiend for the numbers. Ron, take it away.
Thank you, Margaret. Good morning, everybody, and thank you all for joining us. We want to talk a lot about the structure of the race, demographically, geographically, but let's start with current events. Maybe ask everybody, what was your take on last night, how well it worked, both the overall messaging and now the specific controversy about Melania Trump's speech?
There was a moment when House Homeland Security Committee Chairman Mike McCall said, do you feel safer than you were 8 years ago? And in polls, people consistently say no, that 54% told Suffolk University poll that they feel less safe than they were 5 to 10 years ago. So there's this real sense of anxiety, and I think the question is, are people going to approach that anxiety by saying, I want a steady hand with experience, do I want more of the same to keep things calm and deal with that anxiety, or do I want something totally different? And at the moment, polls seem to be suggesting people kind of want that calm. Hillary Clinton tends to beat Donald Trump on the question of who do you trust more on things like terrorism. But last night, the Trump campaign and the message was, we will do things very differently. It was sort of constantly over and over again hitting Hillary Clinton and trying to drive those numbers on trusting her more on terrorism and foreign affairs down. That is, of course, if all of that doesn't get drowned out by the speech thing.
Chris, I thought obviously there was a really strong drumbeat that you're not safer than you were 8 years ago. Did they do enough to make the case that Donald Trump would be a better answer to the problem than Hillary Clinton?
I think they're leading up to that well. I thought Marcus Luttrell, the theme that he set, the speeches all in all, I think they did do a good job of kind of setting the stage for Donald Trump to come on and kind of own the I can make you safer argument. And I agree with what Kristen was saying. I mean, that is really, if that becomes the question of this election, then it sets Trump up nicely.
Kellyanne?
Yes, I would echo that. The other thing is we have a great deal of suburban angst right now in the country. And it's not just worried about ISIS, quote, over there. It's a combination of what you hear of opiate use, crime and drugs, random violence, the idea that you could be standing in the wrong coffee line or just having leisure time in the wrong park and lose your life that day. It's this idea that you can live a good life, you could do everything, play by the rules, be a productive citizen, be a good person, and you just can't control the outcome. So there's a certain feeling of insecurity that it touches a little bit on ISIS and terrorism and radical Islamic terrorism, but it's also just a combination of this feeling that we don't have control. I thought last night was important for another reason. The most popular line of the night was when Governor Rick Perry said, making America great again begins with taking care of our veterans. Very simple, very accessible statement, really off the charts in terms of reception. And that's a bit different from safety and security, Ron, in that it's also reminding you that terrorism-wise, maybe people feel like the current administration has been somewhat incompetent on the job, but it's what Donald Trump said a week ago, Monday in Virginia Beach. If we don't take care of our veterans, what exactly are we doing as a nation? So that's implicit in there too. Rudy Giuliani also did very well.
Yeah.
Fire and brimstone speech, whatever happened to One America.
Real quick, how lasting and how does the first, the potential First Lady's speech echo the last potential First Lady's speech from 2000? How does that happen, and how big an issue is it? How big a deal is it? Just today?
Sure. So to answer with percentages, about 7% of the
Yes,
speech
yes.
was the same. That's what we're seeing this morning. And a 1,400-word speech or so, about 7% the same. I think it's unfortunate, but I also think that Melania Trump gave a first speech ever in front of 35 million people. She is not a politician. I certainly hope it doesn't detract from the other things she said, which included, quote, "The greatest privilege on planet Earth is to be an American citizen." She celebrates 10 years of having been that herself next week. Also, she transported us into a little bit of a preview of what she would do as First Lady. She said she would try to help those who are less fortunate. She particularly wants to make sure that there are opportunities for all children, particularly in education. And I'll also say this, we all know journalists, I won't name them because I'll be kind, but we know journalists who have had a similar, actually worse situation where entire books had lifted passages. You have research up on one screen, your speech on the other. Things sometimes get melded together.
Can I do the devil's advocate, although I largely concur? Hard to imagine it's a lasting issue. Chris, let me do the devil's advocate. Not that necessarily people would feel less favorably toward Melania Trump, but one of the things that Donald Trump has to achieve this week is convince people that he is capable of being president, and that this kind of incident, and the sense that there's a campaign being assembled on the fly raises more doubts about the management and the professionalism necessarily than about her motivations.
No, I think that's a challenge, and I don't think it is a reflection on Melania Trump, and I don't think anyone's going to blame her for that. But having said that, I know if I turned in a term paper that was 7% taken off of someone else, I would have been failed for that. And I don't know how you come out of a situation like this without somebody losing their job. I mean, I do think it's a bigger deal, I think, than what others may, and it's one that does reflect on the overall campaign and the professionalism. And because of that, it cast doubt, and so that's what's being talked about today rather than the strength of any of the speeches.
All right, let's go to the race. Kellyanne, on June 12th, you tweeted an unequivocal assertion: Trump will win. Kristen, you wrote in early July, while it is 4 months to Election Day, Trump will need to dramatically reverse his current standing in order to seriously compete. And Chris, right, perfectly being in the middle here, you said, quote, in June, there is enough of a white swing vote that's been a traditional Democratic constituency for Trump to win. Explain, Kristen.
Well, so I'm looking at the Electoral College, and I'm seeing that in order for Donald Trump to win, he needs to not only hold every electoral vote that Mitt Romney had, he needs to flip 64. So you say Ohio, Pennsylvania, Iowa. These are ones that the polls are suggesting Donald Trump's actually doing better, much better than Mitt Romney was doing. These are competitive. But that doesn't get you 64. And so then the question is, where are you adding more? Is Michigan on the table? I haven't seen compelling polling yet that suggests it really is. Is Wisconsin on the table? I think that's an open question. I think Florida is the biggest question mark right now. And there, again, it's these big demographic trends.
Right.
You have lots of folks. The state of Florida is it's a state with a large and growing Hispanic population, and Donald Trump's struggles there, I think, will make it hard for him to capture those. Then you also have the question of a state like North Carolina, where both CBS and NBC's most recent statewide polls showed Donald Trump down. If he's playing defense in a place like North Carolina, holding it and picking up that other 65 is hard. It's not impossible, but that's tough math for him.
At that point, you're at 80. At that point, because it's 50. We're going to come back to that kind of Sun Belt, Rust Belt distinction in a minute. But Kellyanne, talk about the overall. You say Trump will win unequivocally.
So a couple of things. When you look at the 8 of the 9 swing states that Mitt Romney lost, then you see great opportunities for Trump-Pence to make some inroads in those areas. Basically, as the governor of Indiana, Mike Pence can take the comment that Hillary Clinton made in West Virginia. I will put the coal industry out of business. Mark my word. And he can say, look, as a governor, the last thing I would ever do is tell an industry, we will put you out of business. It's our job, really, as governors and, frankly, in Congress, to make sure that industry is attracted and retained in your state. So he can take a comment that was made in West Virginia, where Donald Trump's ahead by double digits, and travel it westward right through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa. Doesn't mean they win all those states, but they become more competitive. Let's just state the facts now from 2012. Some of these races were not squeakers, some of these states. Ryan lost Paul Ryan's state of Wisconsin by almost 7 points. They lost Colorado by 6. They lost Iowa by 6. These weren't squeakers. They weren't close, even though many projected they would be. And so you can look at demographics. You can look at an electoral map. I would also suggest we look at the way people view themselves situationally and attitudinally. And I think the Republican Party was veering dangerously close to becoming the party of the elites for many reasons, some which are obvious, some which may not be so obvious. And now I believe Donald Trump has made the party more the party of the worker, really talking about this economic grievance. Men in focus groups say, I'm getting screwed. Women say, I'm struggling. They're both saying the same thing by and large. And I think Donald Trump and Mike Pence can help him complete this transaction, because in Indiana he inherited 8.4% unemployment rate. It's now less than 5%. He's sitting on a surplus of $2 billion. He has net increase of manufacturing jobs, something people think just can't be done. He's done it in Indiana. I think they can complete that transaction, that the Republican Party is more the party of the worker. In the past, the Republican Party has done a great job, including at the 2012 convention, speaking to the job creator. You didn't build that pro-entrepreneur, 7% of the country. Speaking to the job seekers, the unemployed, another 7%, and now fewer in the country. What about the vast majority of American households that are job holders? If we have messages that actually appeal to the job holders, then you put some of those states in play.
Chris, we
Well,
are taking away the races today.
There are 7 counties, or 7 states in which there are swing counties where you can really kind of judge what's going on based on the county. And one of my colleagues, Jeff Rowe, who was the campaign manager on Senator Cruz, he's got a polling arm of his, and they released numbers as of Sunday night that I thought were fairly interesting. Hillsborough, Florida, which is, you can really look at Hillsborough and how it goes, usually goes to the state of Florida. There, Trump leads by 3, 43-40. Jefferson, Colorado, Trump leads by 1, where he was down 4 just a month ago. Watauga, North Carolina, Trump leads by 7. Sandusky, Ohio, Trump leads by 11. Lucerne, Pennsylvania, Trump leads by 23. Each one of these are swings that are indicative of what's going to happen there. Washoe, Nevada, Trump leads by 12. And then Loudoun, Virginia, where Clinton leads by 3, which I think would be closer than you would expect, because one of the challenges Trump has is with the college-educated whites, where he does do well with the less
I was going to say, because I mean that's a list that's a heavily blue-collar list.
It is.
He would be where he is running best. We don't have Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, or Bergen County, New Jersey, or Oakland County, Michigan, on that list. So when you know, one thing I've been struck by, I mean, Hillary Clinton goes up and down in polls. Donald Trump has not moved a vast amount in national polling. In the kind of the serious national polling since mid-May, there's been one poll that has had him higher than 42, which is ABC, Washington Post. This latest one had him at 43. Generally, 42 has been the highest number in almost every poll. I'm wondering, do you think can he get to 50%? Or to win this election, to win the popular vote, which all but 4 times in our history, the winner is also in the Electoral College, to win the popular vote, does he need the winning number to come down by a large number of voters siphoning off to third parties? Can he get to 50%?
Well, I think one of the big questions is all of these folks who in polls say, I'm going to vote for the Green Party candidate, I'm going to vote for Gary Johnson. Are they really going to, or are they just lodging a protest with the pollster who's on the phone and they're not going to turn out, or they ultimately get to a voting booth and they decide, I just can't vote for Hillary Clinton, or I just can't vote for Donald Trump. I just can't let them be president, so I need to vote for the other person. That's question 1. And then question 2 is, did some of these folks turn out at all?
Yeah.
So, 42% if you're talking about the universe folks are polling, but if there are enough folks who are depressed, maybe kind of lean Democratic, but are persuaded that Hillary Clinton is just untrustworthy, or a whole, all of the other things that have been said about her, that she doesn't deserve their vote, do they wind up just staying home? As ever, the cliche is, it's all about turnout, and I mean, that certainly
And in
applies
that way,
here.
we're really in uncharted territories, Ron, because you look at the CBS New York Times poll that was released this week, and Hillary Clinton is up to 2/3 of Americans saying she's not trustworthy, she's not honest, and I feel like we're almost inured to that now. It's like, oh, another poll says 2/3 of think about what that says for a moment, please. 2/3 of Americans are saying that a major party's nominee, whom they've known for years, who would be the, quote, first female president, they're looking past all that and saying, I don't trust her, she's not honest. 57% of Democrats in that poll say she is honest. 37% say she's not honest. That's a remarkable number for your partisans, over 90% of whom you need to vote for you. So essentially, are they saying she's a liar, but she's our liar, and I'll look past it? 74% of independents say she's not honest or trustworthy. That matters, and I'll tell you why it matters. Because in open-ended associations with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, the top-of-mind associations are negative for both of them, but her most negative, the dishonest and and untrustworthy is 3 times the number of his highest negative. And how do you get around that? It's a great
But when
question.
people have asked directly, who do you consider more honest or trustworthy, or who does the phrase apply to, he often has an advantage, but it's very slight. I mean, that both of them face enormous
But for
doubts
very
on this
different
question.
reasons.
Well, go ahead,
Very
Chris.
different reasons.
Well, yeah, you're right. It is different, and I think to get back to the point of looking at what does the third party matter here, it's I'm harking back to Jeb Bush's comment that he hasn't decided yet whether he's going to vote for a third party candidate or write somebody in. I think he said libertarian to be specific. And I think there are a lot of voters out there. I can tell you from some of the numbers we've looked at of Cruz supporters. Half of them right now have not decided how they're going to vote in the general election. I think the same holds true of Rubio voters and a lot of Carson voters. And so you've got a conservative base right now, and you put Jeb Bush in that is still trying to decide what's going to happen. Where is Donald Trump? He's done 2 things since he won the nomination from a policy standpoint that I think reaches out to those voters. One is naming potential Supreme Court justices. Second is naming Mike Pence. Both of those, I think, were solid decisions that helped him expand the base to try and get those numbers back up. But it's, as we pointed out, Trump is winning the under-college educated white vote, probably in a way we haven't seen anyone do since Ross Perot, and they've stayed home the last couple of elections. They've turned out for Bush. They haven't been out since. If he's able to expand back into that and reach into that conservative base, I think that's what gets him to the point where he can win, despite the negatives.
Is it, at this point, it appears, after the FBI report, it appears, Jim Comey's statements, it appears more likely, maybe even probable, that we will get to Election Day and a majority of Americans will express an unfavorable opinion about each of these nominees, which is unprecedented. What does that mean? How does that play out?
I feel like that means that whoever the next president is will not have a mandate. They may win an enormous electoral college victory and not actually have a mandate to do much. One of the major network polls that came out this weekend asked people, are you primarily voting for the candidate that you just told us you're voting for, Hillary, Trump, whomever that is, or are you primarily voting against their major opponent? And majorities of both Trump and Hillary Clinton supporters said their vote was mostly about voting against the other person. So that to me doesn't suggest that if Donald Trump wins, there's this national mandate to build a wall and stop the flow of folks coming from certain countries in the Middle East. And it suggests to me that if Hillary Clinton wins, there's not a mandate for a bunch of policies that she supports. That it's really unfortunate that this is such a negative election, and I think it leads to just only continuing gridlock and lack of action in Washington, which only exacerbates the anger voters feel.
Do any of you have a feeling for how big a share of the electorate is unfavorable toward both and how those voters may ultimately play out, Chris?
Well, if you figure there's 2/3 that are some way or another unfavorable towards the other, and just simple math, it's got to be at least 1/3, and it could be a lot higher. I was trying to find what that overall crossover was, but it is, and to the point of the premise of the question is how many of those stay home and don't vote in that election at all, and I think that's really the challenge that exists, and it's what controls whether or not Republicans will keep the Senate and potentially lose seats in the House is whether or not that Republican base vote turns out. Do they get motivated to turn back out? And does that negativity end up having an impact on just not voting maybe in the top of the ticket race? Or does it mean that they just don't vote at all? And I think that's, at least from a Republican standpoint, that's my biggest concern.
Go ahead.
2 things I would add to that quickly, Ron. One is the threshold question for many Americans this year is not for whom to vote, but whether to bother at all. And this is the type of presidential election where people will say, I don't feel like I'm derelict of my civic responsibility or my constitutional right at all. I feel like I'm sending a message by abstaining from the process. Secondly, as we saw in the primaries, and of course generals are different, we all know that, but enthusiasm matters. And Hillary Clinton has a serious enthusiasm gap right now. The question is, what will motivate voters more? Is it the fear and anger? Is it a referendum against Donald Trump and the unknown and what we don't want, temperament qualifications? We weren't allowed to talk about qualifications and experience in 2008, if you remember, but now we're supposed to. Or is this really a referendum on Hillary Clinton? The campaign in its natural resting place is probably a referendum on Hillary Clinton just because she's better known and she is arguing in essence for 4 more years.
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, is this primarily, I mean, historically you would say, yeah, it's a referendum on the party in power, but is this primarily a referendum at this point on Hillary Clinton, or is it more a referendum on Donald Trump and whether you can envision him as president?
Jump ball.
What would you say?
What's so fascinating is that I believe it was said last night that it seems both candidates agree that Hillary Clinton would be a third term of Obama. Hillary Clinton loves that message. Donald Trump loves that message. And President Obama's approval ratings have now hit sort of their highest point since, I believe, early 2009, or when he was first inaugurated. So, his approval ratings are good. People still feel anxiety, though. And so it's not, it at this point is still an open question. Is it good that she is positioned as the third term of Obama? You would think, well, is this going to be a referendum on Obama's presidency? But I feel like the strong personalities and brands of the two candidates have actually made that less of a deciding factor.
It's funny. We actually added a question to a survey just to release it and kind of see what the numbers were as to whether or not Democrats would prefer to have a third term of Obama or Hillary Clinton. And better than 2/3 of Democrats said they'd rather have a third term of Obama. And I think that's really her problem, is she's trying to make it about that. But I don't know if that's a motivational factor. And it's really to run as just a third term. It hurts her with independents. It hurts her with swing voters. It hurts her with, and that's it's a really tough place for her to be.
And we also know cool is not transferable. So I think it's great for Hillary Clinton. She has the President of the United States, an increasingly popular one. Kristen, you're correct with her. But this convention this week feels like Donald Trump's convention. I don't know if he'll feel that way coming out of Philadelphia next
And there
week.
is a theory that one of the reasons his approval rating is rising is because people view him more favorably against the backdrop of both
no
Trump
question.
and Clinton, right?
Yeah,
That's right.
All right, so let's turn to the map, and let me start with you, Kellyanne. What is the most plausible path to an electoral college majority for Donald Trump?
So it would be some combination of Ohio, Florida, Virginia. Mitt Romney lost so many states. There are a number of different scenarios that could work. He could also try to compete in places like, he's competing in places like Iowa. We feel a little bit more bullish on Pennsylvania, Michigan, maybe Wisconsin, then past nominees perhaps could have, only because of the combination of the message and the running mate, and frankly, his opponent. Mitt Romney and John McCain ran against a much more popular, much more charismatic, much more trusted, seen as honest and change-making opponent in Senator and then President Obama than Donald Trump's running against. He does benefit in a large way from the company he keeps.
So the ones you put at the top of your list, though, were Ohio, Florida, and Virginia.
I would, but I'd also throw in there Pennsylvania. I think these messages end up being regional also. These messages are ambient, they're borderless. And the message, I don't think that we've had a jobs message in the past and an economic message, but it's been more macro. Now it's more of a message that has that illegal immigration trade access, AXIS, where he and now they are pushing an argument, making people feel like their jobs may be forever gone in Mexico, over in China to a factory worker or a robot. And people are nodding their head and say yes.
I want to go back to your point from before, because if you look at the swing states now, they kind of roughly cluster into two groups. You have a group of Rust Belt swing states, which are essentially Ohio, Iowa, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, which are a little further away because they're part of the blue wall that Democrats have won at least 6 straight times. These are older states. Per the census, at least half the voters in all of them are non-college whites. And they're less diverse. Then you have the other group of swing states, which you were kind of alluding to, which have emerged really since 2000 across the Sun Belt, states that have been more reliably Republican before that. But you've got Virginia, Florida, and North Carolina in the Southeast, Nevada, and Colorado in the Southwest. Since 92, Democrats have won the Rust Belt states 27 out of 30 opportunities. They've only won the Sun Belt states 13 out of 30 over that period. But in the latest polling, the NBC Marist polls and the other state polls, they produced 4 virtually mirror image polls in those Sun Belt swing states: Virginia, North Carolina, Florida, Colorado, all roughly 44-35. If you kind of look at this, does Trump have the risk that he could gain ground in the Rust Belt but lose ground in the Sun Belt because you have this combination of more diversity and more college whites?
Sure. I think that's the big trade-off, is for every electoral vote that he's gaining in the Rust Belt, is he holding or losing? I mean, what's happening in these other states? And when you've got a state like Florida, where on the one hand, Quinnipiac says Trump's up 3, on the other hand, there are other pollsters showing that he's down 7. I mean, that's a big question, but to me, you look at folks moving from Puerto Rico to places like Osceola County in Florida. I mean, the demographics of Florida make me believe it's very hard to conceive of Trump winning there. So he really does need to pull off some of these states from the blue wall in the Rust Belt. Now, there's this interesting thing that where when you ask people, do you believe that your kids are going to be better off, that their future is going to be brighter? And you find that about 2/3 of Republicans say no, only about 1/3 of Democrats say no. So there's more of this sense of optimism, that folks who are on the Republican side right now, it's this very pessimistic, my future's not going to be as bright. And that's something that you see in some of these places where the jobs have gone overseas and they're not coming back, where Trump's rhetoric really resonates.
Right.
So he's got a message that's tailor-made for places that feel like opportunity has left. That's very different than a place like a Florida or Colorado where it feels like things are a little sunnier.
Yeah.
Well, and to that point, the one state we haven't addressed yet is Nevada, where I mentioned Washoe County
Yeah.
a little bit ago, where Trump's got a 12-point lead. I can tell you, I'm doing the Senate race in Nevada, and so from that, I see a lot of numbers coming out of there. And one interesting product right now, Trump has a lead, but I'll tell you, we came out of the field with a survey, and I looked at the Hispanic crosstab, and Trump was getting 37% of the vote. And I said, there's no way that's right. I actually went in and redid those interviews, just the 37%, because I wanted to find that. I can't right. Exact same result. So it's interesting from a standpoint of what Kristen was pointing out, where there is opportunity challenges, where maybe there's been a lot of jobs leave, and Nevada would certainly be the case, be an example of that over the last few years, that Trump does seem to be doing better than might be expected. And I think that's why he's more competitive than we might have seen past Republicans in a state like Pennsylvania, in Ohio, and again, Nevada, where he can build a winning coalition.
Well,
And I
I said
should have
broad-
mentioned New Hampshire. Did you
Yeah,
mention
New,
New Hampshire?
New,
I didn't,
New Hampshire would be the
that's-
other. New Hampshire's kind of like, it's part of that Rust Belt demographically.
Yeah, it is, that's right.
Not geographically, but demographically, it basically resembles it. Do you think, that's a striking thing, because we've had 2 polls out now, we've had several polls in the past week with Clinton into the mid-70s among Hispanics nationally. And do you think he can sustain a showing in a state like Nevada in the mid-30s among Hispanics based on economic discontent?
Ron, I've spent the last year being wrong every time I predict what's going to happen with Donald Trump. So I'm hesitant to do that, but I have been surprised at the states where I've been in the field where I've seen how well he is doing with Hispanic voters in that specific state. No, nationally he's doing very poor. But when you look at states where his message is resonating,
where else could be? What would be?
It's specifically congressional districts, but and lower percentages. But Missouri, I just got out of the field there with the survey where I saw he was doing fairly well. Texas, so states, those types of states where it may not matter ultimately to the overall state, but still doing better than you would expect with that demographic.
And do you think, looking at the broader point, what is your take on his ability to compete across the Sun Belt compared to his ability to compete in the Rust Belt?
I think. I really don't have anything to add to what Kristen said. I think it really deals with whether or not it's a place where you've seen economically depressed areas, and that is where his message resonates most strongly.
Mm-hmm. Kellyanne, what does Mike Pence do for Donald Trump? And is there any vice president that Hillary Clinton could pick that would significantly change the battlefield?
I've already mentioned Mike Pence makes some of those Rust Belt and Midwest states more competitive, and to Donald Trump's credit, he had already made them competitive. He won most of them, with the exception of like the home state for John Kasich here in Ohio, and a few, and then of course Wisconsin, where Ted Cruz won by double digits. But he makes those states more competitive. I think he also, in addition to bringing this closer to the party of the worker, blue collar roots, very rested, very everyman experience. The 12 years he spent in Washington, I would describe Mike Pence, who's also a client in full disclosure, I would describe him as somebody who was in Washington but never of Washington. He also did something that I don't think has gotten a good amount of coverage so far this week as we get to know him. Mike Pence was one of a handful of Republicans while George W. Bush was the president to stand up against those big spending bills. And in retrospect, that's what a lot of the grassroots really praise. He voted against No Child Left Behind, against Medicare Part D, against TARP. Very few Republicans still in public office at any level who can stake that claim. And that also just shows a sort of the nerve, the moxie you have to stand up when you think something is wrong. The other thing I believe is Mike Pence shows that you can challenge Hillary Clinton's candidacy and would-be presidency at 100 decibels, that it could be done surgically and methodically and factually, and not always with fire and brimstone in a very more polite, mild-mannered way that people, unlike me, people who live on the East Coast like me, can't always appreciate that that's the way a lot of folks in this country confer with each other.
What does Pence add?
I'm not as convinced that vice presidents matter that much. I think that Mike Pence was a good choice in terms of putting aside for any folks in sort of the donor class who are concerned about Donald Trump, is he going to go rogue? I think Pence was a good pick on that front. But and I think, as Chris mentioned earlier, whether it's the Supreme, hey, this is who I'm going to nominate for judges. This is who I chose for vice president. Certainly, if you're somebody who's Republican, you just can't stomach the idea of voting for Hillary Clinton. Mike Pence might set at ease, okay, Donald Trump, he can play ball, but I'm ultimately just not convinced that vice presidents make a big difference.
Yeah, I hate to keep saying it, but I don't have much to add to that. I think from an overall standpoint, vice presidents don't matter from winning a state standpoint, but I do think it sort of it's said to conservatives that Trump is playing ball. He is a part of he's sort of giving out olive branches to
Is there
conservatives.
any Clinton pick that would worry you more than any other Clinton pick?
I think the Clinton pick that would worry, oddly enough, I actually think that Elizabeth Warren would potentially, because Elizabeth Warren also has this sort of full-throated, kind of talking about justice for workers and the economy is rigged, the sort of message that I think Hillary Clinton herself is very ill-suited to prosecute, but that Elizabeth Warren clearly gets people fired up about. There's a ton of other issues with Elizabeth Warren's candidate, but I think it would give Hillary Clinton credibility on something where it's really helped Donald Trump that she currently doesn't have much.
Yeah, I can't think of one of them specifically, but I like to give you an example. One of the Castro brothers. I think right now, I think Clinton is going to have trouble, even though she does well with Hispanics and African Americans. I'm not seeing the same level of motivation, and you've got to look at the difference that minorities made for Obama in 8 and 12. And if she were able to motivate Hispanics or African Americans at the same level, I think it makes it very difficult to beat. And right now, you're not seeing that same level of motivation. And so that's what I would think would be, if I were advising her, which I'm not, but if I were, I would tell her to go in the direction of picking somebody like a Castro brother.
I would be worried about Elizabeth Warren. I'd be worried about Bernie Sanders, because then I think she would show party unity. He won 22 states and millions of votes. We really, for all the talk about the Republican Party is not unified, which I think is very overwrought. We don't have an equivalent in the Republican Party, Ron, of Bernie Sanders, somebody who won 22 states and millions of votes, who just last week decided, what's on my to-do list? Oh, get out of the race and endorse the nominee. His supporters don't look like they're going to back down anytime soon, including in Philadelphia. So that would be a pick that would worry me, but even she, who's very ambitious, if not craven in her selections, is too prideful to pick Bernie Sanders.
Let's talk a little bit about, we've kind of touched on it when we talked about Nevada, we talked about the Midwest, but let's talk now head on about the coalitions and what a winning coalition would look like for each side. If you use the exit polls as your starting point, I know there's a debate about whether the exit polls are exactly right, but it's a common yardstick to use as a starting point. In 2012, Mitt Romney, according to the exit polls, won 6% of African Americans, 26% of Asian Americans, 27% of Hispanics, 56% of college whites, and 62% of non-college whites. That's the baseline. Where is Donald Trump likely to improve on that, and where would you most worry that he would lose ground? Chris?
Well, I think non-college whites is where you have to start. I mean, that's where we see in the numbers I read off before. That you can look at where he's been able to motivate. Because you look at non-college whites, about 6 to 8 million, depending on which exit polls you believe, did not vote in 2008, 2012. Were not motivated by McCain and Romney. And really, we haven't seen them turn out at the level that we've seen excitement right now since 1992 for Ross Perot. And if he's able to create that level of motivation, the other one that we talked about all the time on the Cruz campaign was the 54 million evangelicals. Now, those are based, we asked all the time, where do those come from? That comes from the Wheaton College for the Study of Evangelicals, percentage of 39% of the population being evangelical. And if he's able to create a motivation there, which he was able to do so in the primaries, Kellyanne spoke about enthusiasm, and you cannot underestimate the significance of the enthusiasm that exists in the Republican primary. We had record numbers in almost every state. If that continues in the general election, that is no question between the non-college educated whites and the evangelicals a winning coalition.
I think Reagan was 66% of non-college whites in '84. Can Trump get up that high?
I think he could actually exceed that.
He's at 62 now. Yeah, I think he
And do you
could.
think he can get to the Reagan level too? You also think he
You can
can?
get to the Reagan level. And they're a slightly smaller group than they
Yes,
were.
that's right.
Reagan. So that's key too. Unmarried women are a higher percentage,
Right.
big time, double probably the percentage of when Reagan. And something like non-college whites are a smaller percentage. But yes, I think he can run the tables there. It's also, the other thing I would mention is when you listen to those Romney-Ryan figures by race in 2012, you are quickly reminded of just how poorly Romney did among these groups, and how even if Donald Trump begins there or just even a little bit behind, it becomes quickly apparent. I mean, is he going to 6% of the African American vote? He could do much better than that. We'll see. But people forget just how bad it really was.
Well, but when you look at African Americans, if you look at all the non-white voters combined, it was 80 to 17, I think was the number. last time. Will Donald Trump match that 17, or is he at risk of falling even below that?
I think he can get higher, but it really depends on turnout. I mean, like the enthusiasm, whoever Hillary's able to turn out, she's got a machine for this purpose. That will matter because the models, as we know all through the primary, got totally turned upside down based on turnout figures, evangelical crossover.
Do you think he could match, exceed, or fall below, particularly among Hispanics, African Americans, and Asian Americans?
At this point, it seems that he will not exceed where Romney was with these groups. I think the question then is, can he run up the numbers with other groups? If he's going to perform worse with college-educated women, then can he perform even better with non-college men? I remember, I always quote, you did an interview with an unnamed senior Romney advisor. I actually, one day I need to, I'll like figure out who it was.
I may be ready to reveal it.
Who said, you know, our goal is to get 60% of the white vote, and then said, this is the last time anyone will try this.
Right.
Well, it seemed at the time that was...
This, by the way, this is the last time anybody will try to win essentially with white voters only.
With white voters only. And said, you know, one, it was, well, maybe that was one time too many.
Right.
On the other hand, it seems that Donald Trump is going to try it. But then, CNN's poll that came out this weekend, I think, had Trump at 57% with white voters. And
there's a very specific reason for that. So he is, as you say, he is in potential to grow from Romney among non-college whites. But as we wrote in May, if you go back in the history of polling, exit polls to 72, the American National Election Service back to 52, no Democrat has ever won college-educated whites. No Democratic presidential nominee in the history of modern polling. Johnson came close, Clinton came close in 92, none have ever won it. The last three polls released nationally, Aaron's here from NBC Wall Street Journal, ABC Washington Post, and CNN, all had college whites essentially even, Trump +1 with all three. Why is he underperforming relative to Republicans? And again, according to the exit, Romney won college whites by 14, Romney won them by 4, Bush won them by about 10. So he's running about even at best at this point. Why is he underperforming with college whites, and can he win the election if he does not improve with those voters?
well, I mean, there are a host of things that I think you can point to in Donald Trump's sort of campaign over the last year that would perhaps be off-putting to folks in that demographic. But I mean, really think about the core of his...
Explain them.
So I'll take the economic message then. If your message is, let's look at, say, Mitt Romney's economic message. You talked about, tax cuts, things like that. These are things that, tax cuts, that's not necessarily what folks who are the non-college whites are interested in. They want to know how their job's going to come back from China. So it's that pivot from sort of issues, an issue set that seems more tailored to that college-educated set to the non-college set. I mean, that's, I think, broadly one thing that I would point to that's causing...
I'm a big believer in style when it comes to these sorts of issues, and it is from an issue standpoint, I would not point to a specific issue. I think it's more in just the way that the campaign has been conducted, the way sort of the schoolyard taunts don't know the candidates. Like, those are the sort of things that turn off the college-educated voter. That looks to say, that's maybe where I am from an ideological perspective or even from a candidate, but I can't bring myself to do that. I think that's what you're seeing reflected.
There's also a social desirability factor. Maybe that's what they're both touching on here, especially Chris, in that remark. There's a social desirability factor, which is why I think there are plenty of hidden Trump voters also. It's just because, I can't find a single hidden Hillary vote in this country. They're all out and about. First woman, Bill's wife, third term of Barack Obama, who's popular among the base and certainly some independents. But there's a social desirability factor that attends to education levels where on the one hand, it's the correct answer to the quiz, not the way you feel, but the correct answer to the quiz has become be against Donald Trump. Secondly, people are just tired of arguing. They don't want every night to feel, every day at the office and every weekend with friends and family to feel like the Thanksgiving table with the in-laws where you're just arguing about everything. So this is why your vote is private.
I want to come back to college. I'm not leaving college yet, but we have some prominent visitors from across the pond here in the room. And there was, in the Brexit, a sense that there was a hidden vote that was no vote that would not tell that to pollsters. But Chris, you wrote in June, we saw zero evidence of in the primary of a shy Trump effect. Not only did Trump not outperform his poll numbers in our data, he often underperformed where he was in the public polling. Could it change for the general? Could there be a hidden Trump? Or do you think people are he's basically, people who support him are willing to say so?
Well, again, I hesitate to predict the future because every time I try and predict about Trump, I was wrong. But I will say in race after race, state after state, we saw him either get right at where we had him in our last night of tracking or in our last model score to a little bit below that. And I think that probably had to do more with the turnout impact, or not having a turnout operation, I'm sorry. And so what does that mean for the general election? Well, unless they're able to build quickly a turnout operation that exists in these states, and I know the RNC is working hard to do that, then I think you probably will see the same thing happen in the general.
In addition to style and the economic message, one explanation of Trump's difficulties with college whites or underperformance has been whether they view him as racially divisive. In the Washington Post ABC poll this week, 51% of college whites said they consider him a racist. Now that might be answering the question, but how much does the way he has talked about immigrants, Muslims, Black Lives Matter, things like that, how much do you think that affects his standing with college whites?
Well, I think that's a huge piece of it because, again, if you are somebody who has gotten a college degree in America, it is extremely likely that you are feeling at least okay about your economic situation. There's a huge gap between those who have gotten college degrees and those who don't, and specifically those who perhaps have tried to get a college degree. I'm talking even more specifically about younger people, but those who have tried to get a college degree, they've maybe struggled, maybe they have a lot of debt, and they're looking at things through a lot more of a pessimistic lens. For them, all of these big, exciting changes in society, we're getting more diverse, there's all this technology, we're so globally connected. There are folks that feel like winners, and there are folks that feel like losers on that, in that game. And that's kind of what you saw in Brexit. You know, Lord Ashcroft's polling showed that people who supported Leave were less likely to think that the internet has been a force for good, less likely to think that, all of this change in society, there's winners and losers, there's people that have benefited and people that haven't. And if you have a college degree, you are more likely to be in that bucket that feels like those changes are positive or have benefited you. Whereas if you are a Donald Trump supporter, you are sort of less likely to feel that those changes are a good
Kellyanne, I mean, if honesty and integrity is the big Clinton hurdle, and you look at these college whites, her unfavorable numbers are really poor. Her honesty numbers are really poor. The biggest hurdle for Trump, it seems to me, beside the two, one is this question about whether he's racially divisive, but the other one has been the question of whether he's qualified to be president. Again, in that Washington Post ABC poll this week, 60% of college whites, and this has been a consistent number, say they do not view him as qualified to be president. Is that the biggest challenge this week to convince Americans that he's qualified to be president?
Well, qualifications is one. And the other, and it's for this reason, it's that I thought it was very clever when President Obama endorsed Hillary Clinton. What did he say? He said she's the most qualified person to ever run for president. We can argue about that, but that's a smart strategy because he couldn't say the most charismatic, the most exciting, the most inclusive, the most warm.
I was wondering when she said that, I was thinking, where was Thomas Jefferson
It does
in this?
Thank you.
Exactly.
I think he meant this, maybe this century, but anyway, or this decade, but which would be true.
Since at least 12.
Yes, exactly, since at least 12. But the fact is, what matters most to the voters? So as I said, and it's not a small point, ladies and gentlemen, if you go back to 2008, roll the tape, please. Anytime somebody dares say the word, I'm not sure Senator Obama is experienced. This is not an experience and qualifications election, it's a change election. Well, who's to say that the voters don't think this is a change election? Post-two-term presidency, 1992 for Bill Clinton, 3 terms. At that point, 3 Reagan terms, 1 Bush term, and then certainly post George W. Bush, Barack Obama in 2008, now post. This is the way it goes.
Yeah.
And so Donald Trump's best argument is he does very well on the attribute among men and women, strong leader. And if this is a true change election and a true choice election, he will do well. The other thing that I believe he has to accomplish is to convince some of the doubters that he can actually execute and deliver and implement. That's an area of skepticism for voters who have been burned so many times by politicians who just make promises. You have to make sure that it's not just a non-politician making promises, somebody who can actually deliver.
We're bringing the audience in, but Kristen, we get into that because Kellyanne's right. When you look at the polling, when they compare Trump and Clinton, where his biggest lead is always bring change, right? I mean, people do not see her as bringing change; they see him as bringing change. Her biggest leads are qualifications, temperament, judgment, although that judgment has taken a hit, and experience. Which ultimately weighs more, you think, in the end, in people's minds? Is it bring change, or is his advantage there mitigated by the concern that the change he brings might be too risky?
You know, it depends, and I'm sorry to be elusive, but I think it depends on what happens between now and the election. I'll give you an example of this. I mean, going into the second Super Tuesday, whenever we had primaries in Illinois, North Carolina, Missouri, several other states. But you remember the riots that occurred on the Friday night at whenever Trump was supposed to speak at the University of Chicago.
Right.
Going into that day, we saw a dead heat in Illinois. We were actually up. Senator Cruz was up in both Missouri and North Carolina. Those riots caused between a 4 to 10 point movement over the course of that weekend in the Tuesday elections. We ended up losing North Carolina, losing Missouri, and not even getting close in Illinois, where we were within range of getting about 20 delegates because of the way that the system works there. And I say that, I bring up that example to say, depending on what happens between now and Election Day, if you see the similar situation, I mean, every time you see the riots like you did in California, where there are people burning American flags, turning over police cars, and that's the sort of thing that creates the environment that will elect Donald Trump. And it's those are people who I know are against Trump and are most likely Clinton supporters, and they don't realize the impact they're having on this election by those images being broadcast on television, because that is what can cause a college-educated voter to say, you know, that screw the social desirability effect. I'm going to vote for Trump because I'm sick of this. And I think that's the
restoring order, basically.
It is, but it goes deeper than that too.
Yeah. All right, let's bring in the audience. Have at it. Let's see. David. Hold on. I got to wait for the microphone.
Yeah, hi. Dave Lutter from the Los Angeles Times. Just going back to a question that, Ron, that you asked earlier about people who dislike both candidates. Across a range of polls, it's 20 to 25%. And if you look at Obama's improvement, it comes entirely from those voters, the people who like one or like the other, pretty much where they are. But Obama's approval has gone up among the people who dislike both. So with that as preface, my question would be, talk a little bit more about the potential effect that Obama can have on the election. We haven't had a situation in quite a long time in which an incumbent president was enthusiastically campaigning for a potential successor. How much of a difference does that make? And where?
So how many of you here watch the show Veep? So Selena Meyer, her candidacy, her slogan there was, I think it was, change with experience with change. Kellyanne made an excellent point that you had this experience versus change election in 2008. That's what this one seems to be shaping up as. And Hillary Clinton is now in this awkward position of saying, I'm a third term for Obama. Look, his numbers are going up. I'm going to expand on all of the things he's done at a moment when voters seem very hungry for something different and a change of course in some way. So she has this very challenging situation where she has to prove that she is the experience with change candidate, and it's not clear to me yet how she's going to be able to sort of square that circle.
The correlation has been quite high in the last, several cycles. In 1988, 88% of the people who disapproved of Reagan in the exit poll voted for Dukakis. In 2000, 88% of the people who disapproved of Clinton in the exit poll voted for Bush. Roughly 2/3 of the people who disapproved of W voted for Obama. It was a much bigger group. Does Obama's rising approval strengthen Hillary Clinton's hand?
I think it does to a large extent, and that really gets down to you've got to figure out what is this election more like. Is it more like 1992 when we elected? I'm sorry, 1988 when we elected George H.W. Bush, or is it more like 2008 whenever McCain loses? And I don't know the answer to that today. I think that the jury is still out on that, and we will probably not know the answer to that till October. And I'm not trying to be elusive on it, but I just think this is an incredibly changed environment. The more situations like Nice, the more things like Chicago riots or riots in California, whenever Trump goes and speaks there, he has the ability just by showing up somewhere to create an environment that could actually help him in a way that I don't think we've ever seen anyone running for president do before.
How relevant is Obama in your mind?
So I believe that when you have a sitting president of the United States of your party campaigning for you and endorsing you, it's a net positive, certainly. The problem is, and it's been said before by people, but it's also measurable, he does tend to outshine her. And so if he can keep his own schedule away from her, if he's doubling the territory with her, which is what your running mate normally does, but if your predecessor can do that as well, that's probably better for her. I thought he went a little too long and a little off script in North Carolina. It showed, boy, I really miss this juice. This is exciting. They love me. And she was sort of sitting behind him like, okay. So there is that, and my previous comment, Ron, that cool is not transferable. It's just not, and we all know that. I do feel coming out of Philadelphia, maybe the bar is set so low for her oratorical skills that people say she gave a great speech, and perhaps she will rise to the occasion, but there's no way going into Philadelphia that none of us can deny that action-packed lineup of speakers, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. By the way, going back to your very first answer, noteworthy that the place they chose for their first event turned out to be North Carolina.
Right. They moved it from
Yeah,
Wisconsin.
right. Let's see, anybody else? Ma'am.
Hello, Chris Metzler from American Occupational Therapy Association. Speaking of cool, what's happening with young voters?
Yeah.
Which way will they go and will it matter?
The author of the selfie vote. Go ahead.
So I'm not optimistic about Republicans' chances with younger voters. On the one hand, one of the big pieces of advice that is always sort of given to folks who are trying to figure out how do you win young voters is be really savvy at using social media. And gosh, there's no one more savvy at using social media than Donald Trump. But the message that he's conveying there isn't necessarily one that resonates with younger voters. On the other hand, you have Hillary Clinton that says, tweet at me how you feel about your student loan debt in 3 emojis, kind of going too far the other way, and I think executing it really badly. There was this very cringeworthy moment a couple of days ago about Pokemon Go to the polls. Cool is not transferable. But I also don't know that cool necessarily matters. Bernie Sanders and Ron Paul, nothing about them radiates cool. It's authenticity.
Or youth.
Right. It's not about being like young or, I doubt that either of them knows what Pokemon Go is or maybe ever will. But they both, when you watch them speak, you don't doubt that they believe the things that they're saying. And that goes a long way with younger voters. And that's something that Hillary Clinton just doesn't have. And so Donald Trump, his message in so many ways is very diametrically opposed to where a lot of young people are.
On what issues? Where?
I think on just sort of optimism versus pessimism. Because actually a lot of the things
Open
like the
versus
quote unquote
closed as well.
social issues, and people throw lots of stuff into this social issues bucket where the polling is not all identical. But generally, Donald Trump has not actually made that at the forefront of his candidacy. But his struggles with Latino voters will hurt him with young voters because those two things are so linked. Mitt Romney won young white voters by 7 points, but because the youth vote is so demographically diverse in America, if you're struggling with non-white voters, you are inherently struggling with younger voters.
I mean, the other thing we're looking at with millennials, we've been doing it for a while, is we don't just lump together 18 to 29-year-olds. It's kind of silly. I don't even know where that got started. Maybe it's because I'm so far removed from that age group that there's a bit of jealousy there. But I think demographically speaking, as a professional pollster, I was once 19 and then I was 29, and those were two different people. So what we try to do is we look at 18 to about 25-year-old, about 24, and then 25 to 32. What we do, Ron, is we call them the older young voters. And their set of attitudes and aspirations are decidedly different. You're more likely to hear about the abortion, contraception, climate change argument with the college campus crowd. And then all of a sudden, it's not that those issues are no more important, but they sort of recede a little bit in intensity, and they share the space with getting your first job, your first home, becoming part of the ownership society, perhaps getting married and becoming a parent. But let's move on with the natural accoutrements of an adult life. And many people, 25 to 32, haven't been able to do that.
So Trump will do better with that 25 to 32
well, he
cohort
could.
than the younger
We're working
millennials?
on it. He could.
You
This is an area where campaigns matter, though, because it really does. This is not a group that you can just go run ads on TV or tweet every now and then and expect to communicate with them. And I think it's, I take a lot of pride in the fact that with the Cruz campaign, we won the young vote overwhelmingly. If we'd been sitting here a year ago and I told you we were going to do that, you would have laughed at me because of the coolness factor that you guys keep talking about. But having said that, it's a matter of going and targeting them, spending enough of your money on digital that you can communicate with them because they don't watch TV. And I think that's really the aspect of it, is knowing how to talk to them on an individual level about the issues they care about, and not just throwing up a regular TV ad or throwing something on Facebook or just tweeting every now and then and assuming that that's somehow going to translate into them voting for you.
Yeah. Jonathan, do you have a question? Yeah. Our British visitor.
Hi.
Yeah, thank you for that. Jonathan Friedland from The Guardian. I want to ask about the none of the above vote, and I think you spoke about perhaps a third who don't like either candidate. And I'm interested where that goes, and if it goes to either the third party candidate, the Libertarian Party, or even the fourth party with the Green Party and Jill Stein, and I'm guessing there's some overlap there with younger voters, whether you can imagine even people who were for Bernie going over to Gary Johnson for the Libertarians, where that vote goes, and we know from 2000 it can actually make quite an impact.
No, it can.
Post-election.
And, I think the jury's still out on it. And that's one of the things that Donald Trump can do this week or Hillary Clinton can do next week is, it's really up to Trump to try and bring those voters back in this week. It's up to Clinton at her convention to try and bring the Bernie voters back in. And from it's I'm sorry, I'm going to quote Jeb Bush again because I think there's a lot of Republicans right now who are exactly where he is, in which they have not made up their decision. They don't know who they're going to vote for, and there's the people who, obviously from the primary, who have not gotten involved or made an endorsement because they don't know. They want to see more coming from Donald Trump, at least on the Republican side, before they decide how they're going to vote. And I think, we talk about Obama being all in for Clinton next week at their convention in Philadelphia, and whereas this week we don't have George H.W. Bush isn't here, George W. Bush isn't here, Mitt Romney isn't here, John McCain isn't here. And we can poo-poo that, it doesn't matter to the past, but it does matter. It does matter if you don't have unity from a party coming out of a convention. And I think that's a big challenge we have from a lot of voters in trying to decide what they're going to do. Do they vote for Donald Trump? Do they not vote in that election at all? Do they vote for Gary Johnson? Or do they stay home? And the ramifications of that for other offices down ballot are pretty significant.
I'll bet you a lot of the partisans end up coming home. Some will stay home, some will come home. The question really is, I don't care for Donald Trump, I don't care for Hillary Clinton, or I don't know if do you follow that with an and or a but? And right now we see a lot of folks saying, I don't like what Donald Trump says or how he says it sometimes, but I believe he'll bring change to Washington. I don't want 4 more years. I think he actually has created jobs and can defeat ISIS. With Hillary Clinton, the question remains, is it, I don't really care for Hillary Clinton, but? Or is it and I can't vote for her, and I can't trust her,
And the but would be, but I view her as a stable
right, that the but is
executor.
steady as ready,
Steady.
is the way I encapsulate it, steady as ready. I actually think she should lean into the fact that people maybe don't like her or don't think she's very exciting. You should really lean into that. I was Dan Quayle's pollster in the 2000 race, which I think lasted until early 99 since they cleared the field for Bush, something they don't do anymore for candidates. Yay. We let the voters decide. And I remember doing a top-of-the-mind question, what do you associate with Dan Quayle? The very first response was vice president. The second response was potato. And it's like, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
Right? What do you do with this? It's like vice president, potato. And you can lean in and toss potatoes with the letter E out to the audience, or you can hope it goes away. And I think Hillary Clinton would do really well to sort of lean into that. Like, listen, I know I'm not exciting. I know that people have trouble, but you can you know what you're getting. You can trust me. I don't think she wants to say she's a comfortable shoe or chair, but you get what I mean. Steady as ready. I don't know if she's really made that compelling of an argument with that. Now, Donald Trump seems to live in her head, and I've noticed that she will talk about him much more than he will talk about her in any given stop.
I want to take it back for a final question. Donald Trump, win or lose, has redefined the Republican Party in this year. He's made it much more militant on the issue of undocumented immigration, much more skeptical even of legal immigration, which he's called for a pause, much more critical of business. He's described the Chamber of Commerce as a special interest, much more skeptical of international trade. 2 questions. Does this definition, which mobilized a big piece of the Republican coalition, particularly the non-college half of the voters, where he won half of all non-college Republicans in the primaries, does this definition survive him, win or lose? And what are the implications of the party for the way he is defining it long term? Is this a sustainable winning course for the Republicans to follow the direction that he's laying out?
If he wins the presidential election, he will have redefined what it means to be a Republican. To the winner go the spoils. He will earn that right. When George W. Bush became president after the 2000 election, he got to define this is what being a Republican is about for the next 4 to 8 years. But if Donald Trump doesn't win, I think nobody thinks this is Mitt Romney's party anymore. He ran, he lost. The party got to go through a let's figure out what we are now moment. I think if Donald Trump loses, there will be another let's figure out what we are moment. I don't think it will be very clear and obvious what that should be, and there's still going to be a clash coming about, is the reason why we lost that we were insufficiently conservative? Is the reason why we lost we didn't reach out to Latinos enough? Is it all of the above? It may well be. That debate would still be coming. But I don't think that if Donald Trump loses, he still gets to own what the Republican Party stands for. I do think that he has exposed that there are an awful lot of people under this very big tent who have very different ways of viewing the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't agree with the premise that he's redefined the Republican Party. I think there's no question he won, but it is the message in which he won only achieved above 50% in a couple different places. And from that standpoint is, yes, if he is the elected president, he redefines the Republican Party that he was elected from. But I also think you'll see a lot of people who, again, aren't here this week, who maybe have a very different core set of beliefs on what conservatism means and therefore what the Republican Party means, that will reject that. And so the question is what happens after November, whether if he wins, I think that's an entirely different scenario than if he loses, where I think we go back to sort of a more conservative party. But the shame that exists that I would submit to from a standpoint of just what I was looking forward to this cycle was a definition of the Republican Party. Was it the Jeb Bush style of a more moderate Republican Party versus a more conservative Republican Party that I would put Senator Cruz as sort of the lead of, and I was looking forward to that fight between it. It didn't occur because
Trump is
of where
kind
it
of
was.
off in a different direction.
It was
either.
completely
It's on a
different altogether.
axis.
Yeah,
that's
exactly
right.
right.
You know, we talk so much, and I know at the Cruz campaign they did at the PAC, we certainly did, about the different lanes. You know, the evangelical lane, the Tea Party lane, the moderate lane. There was a whole other lane called the Trump lane, and only ever had one occupant. And we just didn't know at the beginning.
It was more of a Venn diagram, I think is what
Yeah, oh, there you go. How long or how winding or how long and really lasting that lane was. But I think this question about the parties, both of them, Ron, is the most fascinating, among the most fascinating questions to me this entire cycle for this reason. The Democratic Party has traditionally been the party that elevates and indeed elects these disruptors, these inspirational, generational, transformational figures. JFK, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter is 54 years old with a 9-year-old daughter when he got to the White House. That's young. And now they've got Hillary Clinton. It's very different for the Democratic Party to have submitted to their royalism. That's usually the Republican Party, who lost to the person who lost to the party who won. And it's been a real change about for the parties in that way, where you had Trump and Cruz get the gold and the silver. Two people who were decidedly anti-establishment, decidedly anti-Washington, decidedly stopped at every turn, trust me, by the donors and the consultants and the mainstream. That you can't win, you can't win. For the Republican Party, at the very least, a non-ideological comment I would make is that finally this fiction of electability, you can win, you can't win, let's all, telling the voters what to do, how to think, who to vote for, who not to vote for, who's going to win, what's going to happen. I think that fiction of electability has been blown apart, and it was replaced by electricity.
You know, I know that I could go on happily for another hour talking about evangelical versus Catholic Latinos and non-college versus college white women, and looking at many of the people in the audience. I think we all could do that, but you guys have been incredibly generous with your time. So unfortunately, I think we have to let you go. Join me in thanking this terrific panel. And wait, I have one last word before you set you out on your day, which is if you are kind of looking for things to do this afternoon before the program, if you come back to our space at 4 p.m. today, we will have a very lively conversation in collaboration with Refinery 29, focusing, Kristen, it may be for free, on young women voters and how political parties can better engage with them. See you all then. Thank you.